Good morning. I wanted to do this morning's message outside. It's such a beautiful spring weekend here in Great Falls, Montana. And since we have been indoors for so long, since we are not able to worship inside our regular worship space, why not take it outside? And besides, the story that we're exploring today is the story about a journey along a road. I've always envisioned it to be kind of a country road, a road where two disciples left Jerusalem on the day of resurrection, probably a little bit perplexed and a little bit confused and maybe even a little bit frightened. And they were traveling to a town not too far away from Jerusalem. Tom read the story for us this morning, so I won't go back into it anymore, but I'm always struck with how this story often resembles the faith journey of many of us. For me in particular, I've often found that my journey in faith is one that is more like the road to Emmaus than the road to Damascus that Paul experienced. Because I often have experiences in life and faith that I'm not really sure what their impact is until I've had the opportunity to go back and sit down and reflect and then realize, wow, I recognize the presence of something holy and divine while that was going on. And so this story about the disciples going to Emmaus and encountering the risen Jesus is a really important and powerful one for me. This is also a story about disruption. The disciples have been disrupted from their normal lives. The crucifixion of Jesus disrupted them, and the resurrection disrupted them as well. I'm sure that they were in a place where they really did not know what was going on, and maybe that was their reason for leaving Jerusalem. Maybe they feared for their life. Maybe they were headed home. We don't know which disciples these were, and so maybe they were trying to find some place familiar and safe. But they encountered something and someone along the way. The text doesn't tell us why or how, but it tells us that they were prevented from recognizing who Jesus was. And he asked them a question: what were you talking about as you walked along? And they stopped and their eyes were downcast. They were obviously sad, distraught, maybe thinking about what it is that they should say. Gets me to wondering, as we are on our own journeys in life and during this time of uncertainty, what is it that might be preventing us from recognizing the risen Christ that comes into our midst? Is it our own fear of what could happen? Is it our grief that keeps us from recognizing new life in our midst? Is it our worry about the future? Is it anger? Does our political leanings get in the way of recognizing new life that comes into our midst? Do our disagreements with our neighbors and our family and our friends put up a barrier from us recognizing where opportunities for reconciliation might happen? We don't know what it was that kept the disciples from recognizing the risen Christ, and maybe they explored that later on. We don't know. That was not kept in the story. But I think it's an important thing that we can do in our own stories, to be thinking about what is it that might keep us from recognizing the risen Christ in our midst. I loved that in the story, as they went on, when they got to the place where they were going, they invited this stranger to stay with them. And how crucial is that? How crucial is that when we are in the presence of someone that stirs us in important ways, that we invite that presence to stay with us, to linger a little bit longer with that presence. I kind of like to think that maybe just their interaction with this stranger kind of stirred some faith within them, that they saw a glimmer of something in there. Well, we all know how the story continues, and as they sat down for dinner, when Jesus took the bread and blessed it and broke it, their eyes were open and they were able to see that it was indeed Jesus in their midst. But then he disappeared from them. He did not linger. He did not stay in the way that we might think. I kind of like to think that when he left, the bread and the meal stayed. Think about that. Even though the risen Christ was not physically in their midst anymore, the bread which he had broken and shared was. The meal that they sat down to together remained. Today, in a little while, we're going to be sharing communion. And I think this story about these two disciples and their journey on the road to Emmaus, where they encounter Jesus, is an important communion story. Jesus goes through the same actions, takes the bread, blesses it, breaks it, and he shares it. And then they recognize the risen Christ in their midst. How often are we invited to do that as we share in communion together? The bread certainly is taken and blessed and broken and shared among us. And we're invited to recognize the risen Christ in our midst. The story goes on to say that they didn't stay there that night. They returned to Jerusalem. They returned to where the others were. They met up with their buddies, and they shared their experience with the others. And they talked about how their hearts were burning within them. And I think this whole idea of them not staying where they were but returning is important for us to hear as well. It's important for us after we have had things in our lives happen where life is disrupted, where we're disoriented, where we're surprised, where we let our fear and our grief dictate our actions. I think it's important for us to recognize those things that ground us and return us to the places and the people that are important. We may not be returning to our physical place of worship anytime soon. We know that we will go through the month of May continuing to worship in this way virtually and in our own homes. But that doesn't mean that we can't continually to return to that which is important to us. We know we love our building. We love being there. We love hearing the organ. We love hearing the choir. We're sad at the possibility of not being there, and probably not being there for a little while. We don't know how long that this is going to take. We're sad that we can't be in one another's presence. But when we encounter the resurrected one, in whatever way we are, whether it's on a road out in the country, or an encounter with a stranger, or the sweet taste of broken and blessed bread, we know that we can always return to that which is important to us, not so much in place, but in spirit and in soul and in faith. One of the things that I've been doing during this time is slowing down and spending a little bit more time journaling and writing. I'll pick a scripture for a day and handwrite it out into my journal and let those words kind of seep in. And then I allow myself to start asking some questions about some of the words that I'm not really sure about, some of the things that I might want some clarification about, some of the things that it might draw some interest for me. And one of the questions that I started to ask myself as I walked around in the story of Emmaus was, to what is it that I want to return that is going to be most important about a life of faith in the midst of a church congregation? I invite you to explore that question as well. As we start to have conversations in our leadership about what does it mean for us to come back, and when should we do that, and when we do, what kinds of safety precautions do we need to be making? Those are all important questions and things that we'll be discussing and deliberating. But even more important than that, I would want to hear from you what will be important to return to in some way, even if it's a long time before we're able to go back into our building. What elements of faith do you long to return to with your hearts burning, your souls on fire, the excitement of being able to share with others your encounter of the risen Christ and to hear theirs as well? So I invite you to let this week ahead be a week of disruption, holy disruption, a week where you allow yourself to be a little bit vulnerable to those things that are keeping you from recognizing resurrection in your midst, and a week where you think about returning. What is it? What value? What faith aspects? What rituals? What element of life and faith do you find that it will be most important to return to? Not just when we come back to the building, but return to in your life, maybe even this week. My friends, I hope that you've had an opportunity this weekend to get out and enjoy some of this beautiful weather. It is so lush and so green. Springs are always so highly valued in Montana because of the nature of our winters. So enjoy them. Find new life. Walk along a country road if you get a chance, and be open to experiencing the risen Christ that might come alongside and walk with you for a while. Blessings, and go in peace.